Oh, now I can hear sound.
Hello, everyone.
아까 4번 마이크, 5번 마이크,
9번 마이크.
Hello. Would you please sit forward? Please move forward. Hello, the International Journalist Forum of the SIGNIS World Congress will start very soon. So please be seated and please move forward to the front seats. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I would like to give you some notes before starting. The International Journalist Forum will begin very soon, so please set your phone to the vibrate or mute mode and be seated to the front side. Thank you. Thank you for your cooperation.
이따 가져갈게. 예. 국가 음악이 없냐? 내가 이거 했다. 2012년도에 형한테 간다고 국민이 형 피아노 치고 소녀나 그래갖고 나 혼자 갔어. 5년이 와 민중만 나 얼씨구만 좋다 우리 모두 기원하세. 오빠 결혼할 때 나 할까? 아니 내 할 때 봄날은 간다 해야 돼. 하루뱅이 봄날은 같이 이제 정을 두고 몸만 가니 눈물이 나네.
I would like to have your attention, please. Hello, everyone. 마이크 좀. 네, 나오네. Hello, everyone. May I have your attention, please? The International Journalist Forum will start very soon, so please be seated and move to the front seats, please. And also, please make sure your phone on the vibrate or mute mode before starting. Thank you for your cooperation. Hello everyone, this is the last notice before starting. We will start the International Journalist Forum in a minute. So please set your phones to the vibrate or mute modes. And if you want to steal the seat at the different seats, so please move forward. I would appreciate your cooperation. Thank you. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Anna Ji-hyun Yu. I'm a spokesperson and executive member of the SIGNIS World Congress 22 Organizing Committee. I'm in charge of the International Journalist Forum. I've been working as an announcer, journalist, and correspondent, and a spokesperson for many international events. But it is the most honorable that I was given this opportunity to run the International Journalist Forum. We will now start the forum with a special performance. It's themed on the origin and will be performed by the K-Classic a cappella group, Tories. Tories wants to present the spirit and excitement of Korea's traditional sounds to you. They will perform a series of musics, Siri-rong Silgun, which is the song about the scene that cuts the girl in the Korean pansori, 흥부가, and Kwejina Ching Ching, one of the Korea's exciting folk songs, and Arirang of Peace, a song that combined Korea's representative folk song, Arirang, and the beautiful spiritual Amazing Grace. Please give them a warm applause.
시금시금 하늘속 태열 당기여라 지리야 시금시금 하늘속 태열 당기여라 지리야 희망을 타고 들어간 아무것도 나오지를 말고 살바만 통 나오느라 평생의 우리가 좀 고프거들랑 허리띠를 돌라면서 자 어서 해봅시다. 실렁실금 한국에서 해여루 당기어라 터뜨려 실렁실금 한국에서 해여루 당기어라 터뜨려 실렁실금 그때여 흥보가 돈을 받고 기분이 좋아서 자기 마누라와 함께 혼자라 그러면 놀아 호른띠 난 먼저 완벽해 놀아보자. 안녕하세요. 국악 아카펠라 그룹 토리스입니다. 반갑습니다.
Good afternoon. This is Taurus, traditional Korean folk song singers. I would like to sincerely congratulate the holding of SIGNIS World Congress 2022 in Seoul. We have brought to you Srirong Shilgun to you, and we are facing many challenges amid COVID-19, and Hongbo was able to become rich by breaking this treasure box that was in front of him. And we hope that you can also share this good faith that Hongbo had. The next song is Kejina Ching Ching. It's an exciting, fun, rhythmic folk song, and we hope you enjoy this rhythm.
괴지나 칭칭나네 시그니스 세계총회 함께하시는 가톨릭 신자 여러분들, 은혜로운 오늘 토리스의 노래 들으시고 전세계 디지털 세상의 평화와 하나님의 은혜와 사랑이 충만하시기를 소망합니다. 괴지나 칭칭나네 괴지나 칭칭나네 괴지나 칭칭나네 괴지나 칭칭나네 괴지나 칭칭나네 서울에서 펼쳐지는 괴지나 칭칭나네 시그니스 세계총회 괴지나 칭칭나네 디지털 세상의 평화 위해 괴지나 칭칭나네 다같이 모여 활동하고 괴지나 칭칭나네 오늘 오신 여러분들 괴지나 칭칭나네 마음 모아 기도하세요. 괴지나 칭칭나네 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 나래 지나치지 나래. 감사합니다.
Thank you. We have prepared 3 songs for you, so this will be our last song for you. And we hope that you will have a blessed time in the love of God. So next song will be about peace, and we will be singing to you, Peace 아리랑 to you. So this will be our last song for the day.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved the wretch like me. I
Thank you. It was a great performance. Thank you. It was a great performance. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause for Tories again. Yes, by your request, I would like to ask encore for them, but we have a limited time, so I will ask them maybe next time. Okay, the SIGNIS World Congress 22 holds its two special programs. One of the programs is the International Journalist Forum. This program is you are with us together. And the other program is the International Youth Forum, which will be held tomorrow at the same time here in the same place. Through that forum, we can hear young people's enthusiastic speech. As a Catholic communicator here, as we are at the same time and same conference room. And now, journalists around the world gathered here under the same topic, the journalist's role for the digital era and peace. Let's just start the International Journalists Forum with a video themed on this topic.
Peace, the role of journalists in the digital age. What is peace? The definition of peace found in a dictionary says it is a circumstance or an age lacking wars or conflicts among countries or regions. Peace is a calm and harmonious state, and any human being would inherently desire peace. The Bible calls peace a God's gift and calls the Lord God of peace. In addition, the first thing Jesus said to his disciples after being resurrected was, "Peace be with you." But are we living in peace right now? Is our society we live in peaceful? The modern society today is full of wars among countries and of regional conflicts, creating a continuing number of refugees and thus getting farther and farther away from peace. Not only physical wars, but also conflicts among generations, genders, and groups are also intensifying. The hate culture has been expanding, sowing the seeds of hatred deep in our society, which grow and grow to become a big shade of conflict, disharmony, lack of understanding, and enmity. In the digital world too, we see conflict situations including verbal abuse and cyberbullying every day, while violence and our moral numbness in the metaverse has become a big social issue. Now an age has begun where we need new standards for and discussions on peace. Pope Francis also, time and again, reiterated the tragedy of wars and importance of peace.
Ogni guerra porta con sé strascichi che coinvolgono tutta l'umanità, dai lutti al dramma dei profughi, alla crisi economica e alimentare di cui si vedono già le avvisaglie. Lasciamoci vincere dalla pace di Cristo. La pace è possibile, la pace è doverosa, la pace è primaria responsabilità di tutti.
In an age of enmity, born out of hatred, what work have we done for peace? What role can media play in this time and age? Up until now, the media has reported the scenes of war and conflict as they were without avoiding them. But what have we tried and done to re-invite and welcome peace to this world besides just showing the facts? Sometimes we tend to become passive in responding to conflict situations while wanting peace deep inside our hearts. However, a call for peace can never be too loud, The loudest sound you can make is the most appropriate. Peace does not know the borders among countries, races, generations, or groups, and is given to anyone and everyone. Any human being deserves peace, and the media community must fulfill its role and responsibility to maintain this common good. Such work and efforts will bring forward a new age of peace that will find home in this world. Let us find out what we, the media community, can do to make the world we live in more peaceful in today's ever-developing digital world. May peace be with you.
The word communication. This word came from a Latin word for share together. The word community, which means a group that its members share their experience, also came from this Latin word. In short, communication is therefore important to feel sympathy, more than merely delivering unilateral messages. However, the world is losing the sympathy to each other, and we are facing more and more conflicts and divisions between people. At national level, wars and conflicts are intensifying. In digital eras, divisions and hatreds are being spread between people. The value of peace is being seriously threatened by these events. In this moment, the world is being connected as a single community with the developments of media. As people around the world watch our forum that is being held here through the internet. We are therefore on a position that even a single word from our journalist's mouth can be spread around the world, which makes our responsibilities heavier. In this International Journalist Forum with the topic, the journalist role for the digital era and peace, we journalists will find the answer to know which role and task need to be performed to realize the communal goodness. Yes, Mr. Dmitry Muratov, a Russian journalist, who was awarded with the Nobel Peace Prize for Peace last year, will start the International Journalists Forum very soon. He is the founder and editor of the Russian news agency Novaya Gazeta, and was once awarded with the Golden Pen of Freedom in 2016 as well. He lost 6 colleagues during their fight against the suppression and corruption in the past, and once stopped his news agency due to the Russian government's censorship and control for his news about Russian invasion to Ukraine. As a journalist who received the Nobel Peace Prize, he has a lot of work to do, but he gladly made his time to make this pre-recorded interview to let us know what you have to do. Keep the communal goodness for peace as a journalist. Based on his today, after a great effort, we are able to invite the special guest. We will begin the International Journalists Forum of the SIGNIS World Congress 22 with a special interview with acclaimed journalist Dmitry Andreevich Muratov, founder and editor-in-chief of Novaya Gazeta, who won the Nobel Peace Prize laureate in 2021. Господин Muratov.
Добрый день.
Добрый день. Добрый день. Доброе утро у вас в Москве.
Именно так.
Приветствую вас.
И я тоже, для меня большая честь выступить перед участниками вашего конгресса. Я надеюсь, что Бог еще не окончательно отказался от проекта человечества, и ваш конгресс поэтому очень важен.
It is our great honor to have you at the SIGNIS World Congress 22, and especially in this forum. We have actually 6-hour difference between Seoul, Korea, and Moscow. It is regrettable that we cannot see you in Korea in person, but it is very grateful to be able to meet you, at least via Zoom and online. I would like to extend my sincere thanks for your acceptance of our invitation to the Congress and this forum. I would like to ask you, first, Mr. Muratov, could you please say hello and greet people around the world who are participating in this Congress and also forum via online or either online or in person?
Для меня большая честь выступить перед участниками вашего Всемирного конгресса 22 года в Сеуле. Я думаю, что только те люди, которые близки к Богу, могут сейчас каким-то образом повлиять на вопросы войны и мира на нашей планете. В России распространена молитва «Помоги мне, Господи». А сейчас у нас наступило время, когда нужно спрашивать: Господи, чем тебе помочь?
Yes, today that will be very good, the agenda and the theme that we can address and also the deal with for the peace in the digital era and peace of the world. By the way, again, from the bottom of my heart, I congratulate you for winning the Nobel Peace Prize. I understand that last year, the winning process was extremely competitive, more than any other year, especially with the highest number of candidates. You received the award as a co-winner with Miss Maria Ressa from the Philippines. How did you feel when your name was announced? And could you share what has changed in your life since you became the laureate Nobel Peace Prize?
Премии в связи с началом военных действий на Украине наша газета закрыта, новая газета закрыта по соображениям цензуры. На нас возбуждено несколько различных дел. Вполне вероятно, у нас решат отобрать лицензию, как у СМИ. То, что касается моих забот, вы знаете, я никогда не думал, но очень много людей стали обращаться для того, чтобы помочь им разобраться в их вопросах. С лекарствами, с инвалидными колясками, с неправосудными приговорами. И да, и я, и с помощью газеты, безусловно, этим сейчас тоже занимаюсь.
Due to the title Nobel Peace Laureates, the expectations on you from the press and global society are very high. Sometimes you might feel that people judge you with the glasses of Nobel Peace Prize recipients. So due to the pressure, did you or do you perhaps have any conflicts or struggles between your value you have been holding on to and the people's expectations judged by that prejudice?
Теперь по сути вашего вопроса. Вы знаете, вот сейчас, когда в Европе свыше 10 миллионов украинских беженцев в связи с тем вторжением, которое организовала Россия, самое главное сейчас для всех, для нас и для медиа тоже, сохранять внимание к чужой человеческой боли. А от медиа в последнее время все больше требуют ласки, бережных прикосновений. От медиа все время требуют, чтобы они давали хорошие новости. Потому что люди устали от плохих новостей. Это очень плохое качество. Это очень плохое качество, когда акционеры новостей хотят сменить повестку, хотят снова развлекать, хотя, еще раз повторю, только в Европе свыше 10 миллионов украинских беженцев. Мы будем продолжать освещать самые больные самые больные вопросы, несмотря на желание публики. Ведь никто из Библии не собирается исключить Страстную Пятницу, потому что это слишком страшно.
Yes, as you stated, it's a really difficult time in the world, not just in Russia and all over the world. Maybe that's why this time here in this forum and our sharing is even more important than any other time. By the way, it has been 86 years since a journalist won the Nobel Peace Prize. The last time was in 1935 when German journalist Karl von Ossietzky received, right? What differences do you notice between today and 1935? And especially any changes from the perspective of freedom of the press and freedom of speech in general?
Сначала о том, что похоже на времена фон Оссietzky. Фон Оссietzky неоднократно говорил, что люди не должны уставать знать правду. И прямо сейчас, вслед за ним, надо повторять и повторять эту мысль. Люди не должны уставать знать правду, потому что медиа – это не спа, это не фитнес, это даже не йога, это неприятное лекарство от диктатуры. И в этом урок фона Оссietzky для всех, для нас, для всего мира. Что изменилось? Очевидно, что изменилось. Во время фон Оссietzky существовало совсем небольшое количество медиа, и все они были под контролем государства. Кроме, пожалуй, одной газеты, которую он придумал, называлась газета «Проводник», «Кондуктор». Теперь, казалось бы, при огромном цифровом многообразии, когда из 1000 сайтов, миллионы различных ресурсов, тем не менее, интернет все больше и больше попадает под цензуру со стороны государств, особенно в автократических режимах. И во времена фон Оссietzky, и сейчас целый ряд государств продолжает проповедовать принцип, что правда – это то, что выгодно государству, то, что выгодно государственной власти. А правда – это то, что дает народу возможность сделать справедливый выбор. Я хочу сказать, что алгоритм за все времена не изменился. Сначала убивают медиа, потом сажают альтернативных политиков, а затем начинают войну. Вот на этот алгоритм мы все и должны самым внимательным образом смотреть. Я надеюсь на ваш конгресс.
Yes, that is a very powerful statement, according to Karl von Ossietzky, and as you quoted, ceaseless marathon to seek out the truth. That really brings our generation as a journalist, and not just as a journalist, to the individual and to country in this era, especially in this digital era. Yes, from the perspective of the overall media environment, do you think that the changes, including the quality of journalism in Russia and other countries, are able to keep pace with the rapid development of media in the digital era?
Мне кажется, что интернет все больше и больше попадает под контроль государства. Стало очень сложно отличить настоящую информацию от информации придуманной. Вместо доставки объективных фактов часто мы встречаемся с попыткой, как будто пчелы летают над полем и собирают лайки, как будто с цветков собирают пыльцу. И с одной стороны в этом огромная вина журналистов, а с другой стороны мы видим, что цифровые гиганты поощряют анонимные медиа. А анонимные медиа никогда не несут ответственности за ту информацию, которую излагают. Мы находимся в большом конфликте между способом доставки информации и ее и факт-чекингом этой информации. у нас конфликт между факт-чекингом и скоростью доставки информации. И я считаю, что нынешний профессиональный стандарт должен быть повышен. Я думаю, что факт-чекинг становится самым главным для работы профессиональных медиа. Только различным фабрикам пропаганды тотальной, пропаганды страшной, пропаганды, которая отравляет мозги, можно противопоставить только профессиональные стандарты, высокие профессиональные стандарты. Эти стандарты известны. Работа во благо общества, невозможность разглашать источники информации, проверка информации и сообщение только той информации, которая достойна быть опубликована.
Yes, I want to go back to the Nobel Prize, the winning the last year, the proceeding and the rationale again. Then why do you think a Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to a journalist again in 86 years in the digital era, where the world can be connected? Could it be to highlight freedom of the press and freedom of expression in the digital era?
Мне кажется, что в последнее время вопросы денег, финансовой нестабильности, вопросы выживания, вопросы климата, вопросы пандемии, эти вопросы базовую ценность, такую как свобода слова, отодвинули на задний план. Вы переведите, я продолжу. Я думаю, что Нобелевский комитет своим решением, месседж Нобелевского комитета такой: не будет свободы слова, не будет контроля за властью со стороны общества, не будет свободы медиа, не будет работы в интересах общества, не будет общество контролировать свои государства, тогда это приведет к диктатуре, а диктатура приведет к войне. Я настаиваю на этом алгоритме. Вот в чем смысл этого послания. Он связан не со мной конкретно и не с Марией Ресса. Он связан с главным смыслом. Он заключается именно в этом. Без свободы слова общество остается бессильным.
And while we are having the interview with you today, we will be able to deeply think about the value of freedom, the value of the freedom of the speech and the press and expression. And again, yes, you dedicated your Nobel Peace Prize to the 6 colleagues who passed away. In addition, you donated your prize money of $500,000 US plus all of the money generated by auctioning off your Nobel Prize, which was a record-breaking $103.5 million US to charities and Ukrainian children affected by the war. This can be considered a very noble act on your part that deserves the utmost respect. Was there any particular reason behind this?
Вы знаете, во-первых, поздравьте меня, я целую минуту был мультимиллионером. Вы знаете, в журналистике существует 2 тенденции. Одна тенденция, что журналист – это наблюдатель. Он должен смотреть за событиями и не вмешиваться в них. Этот принцип называется «муха на стене», когда ее никто не видит, а она видит все вокруг. А второй принцип – это вмешательство в жизнь. Вот Анна Политковская всегда была человеком, который вмешивается в жизнь. Она спасала на войне пленных, она спасала дом для престарелых, она спасала многих людей, которые оказались в заточении. Мне кажется, что современная журналистика обязана вмешиваться в жизнь, потому что ее единственная функция – делать жизнь лучше. Именно этим и продиктовано желание «Новой газеты», которые поддержали меня в том, что мы отдаем эту премию в детские больницы, в детские хосписы, а медаль продаем на этом аукционе, и она идет детям беженцев. Я хочу сказать, что в старые времена шахтеры брали с собой в шахты канарейку. Когда канарейка переставала петь, значит, она умерла, значит, в шахте нечем дышать, там кончился кислород, и надо оттуда бежать. Вот современный мир должен эту канарейку, то есть профессиональные медиа, сохранить. Сохранение в современном мире профессиональных медиа должно быть такой же задачей, как сохранение редких видов животных. Хорошо. Я считаю, что современный мир обязан сохранить профессиональные медиа, так же, как современный мир старается сохранить редкие виды животных.
It sounds like we are facing another kind of global warming. That's the crisis in the environmental side. But on the other hand, in our journalism side, we are facing another kind of crisis that delivers us sometimes because of a high competitive environment, media environment in the digital era. Many the media channels and the press are fighting for just the byproduct aspects rather than just the main spirit or truth or the freedom of the press, the main spirit.
Я согласен с вами. Появилось множество так называемых гражданских журналистов. Людей, которые имеют доступ к смартфону, к компьютеру, и которые готовы выложить свои знания и представления о мире. Или сказать, что вот это, то, что они узнали, это новость. Когда мы говорим о том, что теперь каждый человек это, в общем, тоже медиа, поскольку у него есть смартфон, ноутбук, он может выходить в сеть, он может распространять информацию, мы не должны забывать одного, что, в принципе, многие из нас знают, как лечить болезни, но когда приходится ложиться на хирургический стол, лучше, чтобы это был профессиональный хирург, а не любитель. Так и с медиа. Однако не могут, это все не может заменить профессионалов, потому что обязанность профессионала проверить каждую новость и отвечать за каждый факт. Должно быть какое-то гармоничное сочетание между социальными сетями, в которых люди обмениваются своими мнениями, и профессиональными медиа, информацией которых можно верить. Поставлять информацию должны профессионалы, которые отвечают за нее своей репутацией и отвечают там, по суду за эту информацию. Вот что мы должны сохранить. Мы должны сохранить профессиональные СМИ.
By the way, you said that you don't play hockey, ice hockey, your favorite sport anymore, but you used to enjoy ice hockey as a goalkeeper, and accordingly, you donated the process from auctioning off Valery Hakhramov's ice hockey stick to be used for patients, including patients with spinal muscular atrophy. You have experience as a goalkeeper, a journalist, and philanthropist. So it comes as no surprise that you consider consideration that is highly required of a goalkeeper, the ability to speak out against corruption, human rights violations with freedom and justice, and the readiness to always help others in need as very important traits. What common set of beliefs are needed to sustainably drive these three aspects?
Игра, которая приносит людям радость, и работа журналиста-расследователя, и работа благотворителей, филантропов, они похожи одним. Они выполняют гуманистическую, гуманитарную миссию. Это помогает людям жить. Вот это единственное сходство между помощью хосписом и игрой на льду. Но оно очень важное. Вот эта гуманитарная миссия должна все время продолжаться. Один человек должен ее начинать, а другой должен ее продолжать. Вы упомянули клюшку Валерия Харламова, хоккеиста, которого прекрасно знают во всех странах, где играют в хоккей. И эта клюшка была продана в интересах мальчика со спинально-мышечной атрофией за $100 000. Но после этого, еще через несколько дней, сын Валерия Харламова подарил мне клюшку своего отца, которая у него сохранилась как семейная реликвия. И она сейчас стоит у меня вон там за спиной. Тоже ждет своего участия в продолжении вот этой самой гуманитарной миссии, которая не должна заканчиваться.
So your charity action that continues like a chain for the humanitarian spirit. That's a very good way of living, very impressive. You started your media career at Volchiska Komsomolet, continued on at Komsomolskaya Pravda for 6 years, and then started your independent press with colleagues quite early on. How did you plan to differentiate your company from the existing media? Or was there a special reason behind that decision?
Знаете, в Советском Союзе, в котором я начинал работать, о чем вы упомянули, все газеты обслуживали интересы государства. Без исключения. Или интересы правящей партии, партии коммунистов, или интересы государства. Мы хотели создать газету, которая обслуживает интересы общества. В этом принципиальная разница была для нас, когда мы создавали новую газету.
Yes, then let's talk about a little bit more about Novaya Gazeta, where you are the current editor-in-chief, has announced its hiatus after receiving warnings from the government last March. In fact, maybe I've been told that many other Russian media are facing similar risk now. But could you give us a brief intro to Novaya Gazeta and what you have been up to recently?
Я уже упоминал, что в связи с введением нового законодательства, по которому фактически ни о чем нельзя писать, кроме официальной точки зрения про события на Украине, новая газета остановила свой выход. Сейчас государство хочет отобрать у нас лицензию. И сразу скажу, мы в этом не одиноки. Вообще можно констатировать, что в России больше не осталось независимых от государства медиа. Многие журналисты вынуждены покинуть Россию. Многие журналисты вынуждены сейчас продолжать свою работу за пределами своей родины. Это ненормально. Многие журналисты объявлены так называемыми иностранными агентами, врагами народа. Кто-то экстремистской организации, кто-то нежелательный, а кого-то подсадили в тюрьму. Поэтому разгром независимых медиа, которые были созданы за последние четверть века в Российской Федерации, фактически успешно завершен. Телевизор победил компьютер, а пропаганда победила независимые медиа силовыми методами.
You have constantly visited conflict zones such as Afghanistan, Nagorno-Karabakh, and Chechnya. As a journalist, what do you think is the most desperate matter in these areas based on your experience?
В новой газете не только я, а множество людей, 14 человек, работали в качестве военных корреспондентов во время различных конфликтов. Всюду во время работы на войне наши сотрудники руководствовались тем, что они помогали избежать ненужного количества жертв. Мы всегда находились на стороне жертвы. Это наш принцип. Именно поэтому во время Чеченской войны наш обозреватель Измайлов спас из плена 147 человек. Именно поэтому Анна Политковская сумела вытащить из района боевых действий множество пожилых, беззащитных людей. Именно поэтому наш корреспондент Каныгин во время первого конфликта на Донбассе в 2015 году сумел поменять нескольких российских солдат на несколько украинских солдат. Мы считаем, что гуманизация конфликта – это основная задача журналиста на войне. Журналист должен быть против войны, и поэтому он должен стремиться, чтобы побыстрее наступил мир, и чтобы меньше было количество жертв. Вот это главная наша профессиональная черта.
The digital age has brought about so much change that now war goes beyond the traditional methods, and new concepts of war, such as social media war, is even emerging. Do you see this as a positive change?
Я не считаю, что есть информационная война, специальная какая-то информационная война. Есть просто война. Вот, например, ведутся боевые действия, а в них участвуют в том числе подразделения телевизионное, подразделение интернетовское, подразделение радио, подразделение печатное. Вся пропаганда – это, безусловно, часть войны. Пропаганда всегда направлена на вражду с кем-то. Вот принципиальное отличие сегодняшней эпохи. У нас пропаганда заняла нишу цифровых медиа, пытается их вытеснить. Пропаганда становится тотальна. На стороне пропаганды воюют сотни тысяч ботов, то есть роботов интернета, которые поставляют нужную информацию. Мы имеем дело, мы стоим, мне кажется, в пороге от создания нового интернета, зачатки которого уже есть, поскольку со старым мир уже справиться не может.
I'm also interested in your future plans as a journalist, but also as a philanthropist. Could you share a few words to the International Journalist Forum participants?
Журналистика нужна для того, чтобы жизнь становилась лучше, чтобы мир становился добрее. Вот и давайте пробовать этим заниматься. Мы должны изменять мир к лучшему. И это, извините, вот такое вот простое пожелание. Спасибо вам огромное и до свидания.
During our interview, I have been deeply inspired by your life and beliefs that seem to have exuded virtue and peace throughout the world as a philanthropist and journalist. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to you and your precious time. On behalf of all the audience, I wish you the best of luck for all your meaningful work and stay healthy, in good health. Even though we met Mr. Dmitry Muratov, we met him through online. Let's give him a big round of applause again for his brave and sincere participation for the SIGNIS World Congress 22, especially for the International Journalist Forum. He would love to join this forum in person, but for many reasons, as you may guess, it's not a realistic situation, especially even through the Zoom, he was willing to join partially, but this week, maybe sometime around this time, he has to be in court. That's his reality for now. So again, I do appreciate his participation, his enthusiastic the joining and action for this forum and the message to journalists. Based on his experience, we had a special interview with Mr. Dmitry Muratov, and he showed his insights about how we can protect the peace as a journalist. And now, let's continue to the presentation session. Shall we? Are you ready? Before moving on, I would like to ask all presenters a thoughtful consideration for the audience. Now, people around the world are with us. Among them, maybe either in person or online, might not be the native English speakers, many audience. So I would like to cordially ask your cooperation to speak loudly, clearly, slowly, then they will appreciate it. Okay, now Mr. Jack Barton, I will introduce him as a first presenter. He will start the presentation first. He is a veteran foreign correspondent who is actively working in Asia, Europe, and Oceania. As a veteran war correspondent, he delivered the news of conflict and disasters around the world to us through the media. He will now give us a speech about how we have to report international events from what kind of views and how we put the integrity and honesty into our reports for peace as journalists. Mr. Jack Barton, ladies and gentlemen, please give him a big round of applause and welcome him on the stage.
First of all, I would just like to say following Dimitri on the stage is, I feel a bit like a child who just learned how to play chopsticks on the piano following Beethoven on the stage. But I'd like to thank the organizers, and I'd like to thank all of you joining this Congress in person as well as online. This Congress that's on a critical subject at the moment. I'll see if I can get this to work. As the UN Secretary General pointed out just a few weeks ago, it really feels like at the moment we are trying to re-establish world peace rather than just preserve it. We've entered into a new age. I'm going to throw also a bit of mud at digital platforms throughout this brief talk, so I'd just like to share a brief story to show I do acknowledge the other side. When once in Mosul, just outside, we got a flat tire in an area controlled by the Islamic State in the nighttime and the army in the daytime. And of course, dusk was just falling. And there we were on the road with a flat tire in a road that was about to fall back into Islamic State hands. And we looked for the tire, and we looked for the levers, and we looked for the jack. The car belonged to the driver's uncle, so he didn't know. And it got dark, and that look of fear came on us, and it was like, this is not funny anymore. And suddenly the cameraman threw out the sat dish, opened his phone, put up YouTube and said, Toyota Land Cruiser, how do you fix the tire? 20 minutes later, we were on the road to an army base again, and YouTube probably saved our lives. So yeah, look, there's a lot of positive uses for digital platforms. I used it to navigate here, to coordinate getting to this room. We use it all the time. And on a more serious note, beginning with the Haiti earthquake in 2010, we saw crowdfunding over the internet to assist people there, and we're seeing that again in Ukraine with the refugees, and even down to things like citizens poring over satellite photos in the public domain to search out human rights abuses. There are many positive uses for digital platforms. On the flat tire story still, I actually met this man, Mahmoud Mohammed, just a small digression. This guy had lived in Syria. He had an orchard passed down for families. That had been seized by the Islamic State. He fled to Mosul. That was seized by the Islamic State. I met him on the side of a road, living in a tin shack this big with his family, huddled in there. But he was just one of those incredible human beings that inspires. And instead of going to the camp, he was working so that he could try and make the money to send the two children to school, not so they could have a comfortable life, he said, so that they could improve the world. And he held up the pen. First of all, actually, he said, Akbar. And then he said, if people could just understand the riches of the world beneath their feet, there would be no more war. And it was one of those moments where I was sitting there looking at a deadline, taking some comments, filing for the evening, and it wakes you up. And you think, I've got to do my job better if I'm to make an impact. It's like seeing Dimitri talk. It's like attending the Congress. It's like a wake-up call. And these things, I think these moments are really important. So let's talk about the communications era that we live in. There has been an upsurge in the amount of fake news and misinformation as a result of the digital revolution, which marks the start of what is now known as the communications era that we live in. Much of this distorted information comes from individuals, but a very large portion of it, as we just heard from Dimitri, comes from state actors. The upsurge is happening at exactly the same time that we journalists find ourselves doing more work that requires juggling print with video, with camera, with online, everybody doing the same job, for less money and bigger time pressures, because as traditional outlets are downsizing and prioritizing online content as more people seek their content from the digital arena, though most of the outlets in that arena are still struggling to make funds, which means they're still struggling to function at a high level. So in short, the pressure on journalists is ironically a direct result of the communications era. An era that the American thinker and author John Nesbitt defined as leaving us drowning in information but starved of knowledge. I will talk about the specific challenges of covering conflict in the digital age, but I would also like to first address just some of the common challenges. It's not just for conflict, it's for all aspects of media. One of the reasons we're being starved of knowledge, I believe, is because information is being stripped down to the basics in order to better fit the short attention span items promoted by online platforms to encourage us to scroll through as much content as possible, which generates more revenue through advertising, or just to keep us loyal, so that they can sell our details, our contacts, all of our information to whoever is willing to pay for it. That is unfortunately the shape of the digital world we increasingly live in. Another key reason is that our digital information is now herded towards us by artificial intelligence for the same reasons. So our phones, our laptops, our computers now know more about us than our partners, our children, our friends. Far more about us. Having been in Ukraine throughout the Maidan Revolution, throughout the seizure of Crimea, throughout the start of the war in the Donbass, I'm without any doubt a little bit personally invested. I can't say I'm completely neutral on the subject, and all of my devices know it. If I want to look at something, perhaps a nice tune on the engine in a search engine, I might go to YouTube, look for a song I like. There's no doubt the top suggestion will usually be something like a drone dropping a bomb on a Russian tank or soldier. Now, I never search for that kind of content. Far from it, the exact opposite. But AI knows where my sympathies lie, and so it keeps sending me the most extreme manifestations of my ideas, or the way I might think, or the way any of us thinks, in order to get us to click. Because it knows the moderate view won't get a click, or the less moderate, it has to be the extreme view. Of course, there's always been bias in the media, whether it's radio, print, whatever it is, there's always been bias. But in the general dealings, it was never quite as biased, and also you could tune into other opinions. You know, when you looked around, there were other opinions. You know, they presented themselves, and I think there was still room to intellectually evolve. The digital age hasn't put an end to that, but it is throwing up serious challenges. Of course, I never see anything showing Russia being victorious over Ukrainian forces. I know that's happening. There's plenty of it out there being watched by people like one of my family members who's a fierce Putin supporter. He thinks migrants should all be tossed out. Gay bashers are just fine. And there's a lot of other opinions that are, you know, like the war is all NATO's fault. All of his news feeds, without exceptions, reinforce his viewpoint, 100%. Whereas I'm fed a constant stream stream of videos and news updates that would indicate that Vladimir Putin actually has a serious illness. He's probably going to die any day. And if he doesn't, there'll be a coup to overthrow him, that all Russians hate him, and that Ukrainian forces are doing so well that if we looked at a map, they'd probably be in Moscow on Monday. That's the way the internet now works. That's the way information now largely works. Even a decade ago, I could turn off my computer, pick up a newspaper, turn on the television, still get a slightly biased view, but a much better idea of what is actually going on. And why? Unfortunately now, polarized partisanship is the norm, with old school, conventional networks mimicking digital platforms in a desperate bid that's not working to retain viewers, listeners, readers. For instance, if you think COVID and climate change are hoaxes and that vaccines are being designed by a one world government to track us, tune into that famous US network on the right. If you believe vaccines never hurt a single person, stop people without fail from being infected, that herd immunity to COVID is a real thing, try that other network that openly promotes the opposing political party. Our mainstream networks, even off the digital platforms, are so polarized now because of the digital world and their need to compete. For the real story, we have to wait another 10 years for the documentary, but we won't get to see it because AI algorithms will be so busy pushing sensational nonsense in our direction. And misinformation. These are the problems that afflict news coverage, at least the consumption of it, of all events. But conflict does have some unique attributes. One of them is the ability of social media, the digital platforms, messaging apps, to actually fuel them. I'm pretty sure that without them, we would never have had a group like the so-called Islamic State, or at least it would have never grown as big and deadly as it became. IS used social media and messaging apps aggressively to pursue recruitment and organize its campaigns. It also used social media to promote its activities with a degree of sophistication that even few states have matched. Al-Qaeda, which remains very old school in comparison, just couldn't and still can't compete with those internet-savvy upstarts. And somewhat perversely, this is also the lesson mainstream media is learning. And our challenge is to adapt to the technology without succumbing to using emotive content, stories that last just a few seconds, facts with a heavy slant, and graphic content to attract and maintain an audience. The BBC is in the process of a big shift right now, really leading the way in this area I've just described. It's merging its world news and domestic news content into one channel, and it's sending BBC 4, Radio 4 Extra and CPBC purely online. The BBC calls it a digital first priority. The focus, according to the Beeb, will be streamlining live updates of events as they happen, which has proved to be very popular for everyone. That, of course, means the focus will now shift away from a long history of in-depth reporting that requires extensive research, investigation, and preparation, which probably would have happened anyway given the scope of the job cuts that are going to accompany all this and the extra work burdens that the remaining reporters will have to face, including being anchors, being presenters. But what else can the BBC, or in fact any other big linear network, do, really, in this age? The modern consumer demands, and I'm a modern consumer as well, so all of we demand what we want, when we want it, and that is always now. Perhaps, though, it's not all so grim. In my eyes, the BBC has come alive during the war in Ukraine and has been doing a lot of things we need to talk about when it comes to ways we really can promote peace in the digital age. The BBC has been working tirelessly to debunk fake news and misinformation, and here's the important bit, on both sides. Not just the side it opposes, and let's not pretend we're so pure and neutral in journalism that we don't take sides, though even as we do, we must still allow the other side to have its voice. That's critical. So why is debunking false information important and not just a distraction from traditional news content? Because it has such a powerful effect when it comes to opinion forming. It's like an endless game of whack-a-mole. But if journalists aren't going to do it, who is? How can we promote peace if we are not tirelessly attacking hate whipped up by lies? It's like the BBC awoke from the zombie stupor that it and every other mainstream media outlet, I have to say, experienced from the lead up to the second Gulf War until the collapse of the Kabul government 1 year and 1 day ago today, when the Taliban took power again in Afghanistan. This fake news busting trend picked up steam during the pandemic, but in the mainstream press, at least away from Fox, tended to target information coming from the anti-vax side. There was also information from the other camp, well-meaning information, but nonetheless, blind-eyeing it in the press led to a massive amount of mistrust and a faster stampede towards eccentric podcasters who pass themselves off as sort of journalists. So I am happy to see this trend happening, and I can see this is already gaining momentum elsewhere across other media outlets. A drive back towards transparency and facts that are genuinely factual, and calling out lies, no matter who tells them. Let this continue, please, on a massive scale. I have reason to see this move as a pivotal moment for us journalists regaining a lot, or at least some of the trust that is really essential to get people to turn back into mainstream media content. It was more than 2 decades ago. My unease with the media began around about the same time as the public's unease when I was working at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation in the lead up to the Second Gulf War. And it was a time when journalists were running around with giddy excitement, trying on their chemical suits and body armor and helmets, so excited that a war was coming, getting their box full of jingoism to pour into their stories that would begin with the drums of war. And this is one of the sad truths. Most journalists like war. And as Dimitri said, you know, we've got to be trying to stop wars and oppose them. But the truth is, we journalists like going to war. I was very cynical about it at the time, but I've covered a lot of war since. And yes, I have enjoyed a lot of it, the camaraderie, the intensity. That, you know, it's like a poison in the profession, and that has to be recognized. The first Gulf War was driven largely by the testimony of a traumatized 15-year-old girl before the US Congress, relieving the horrors she'd witnessed, except of course she hadn't. She was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, and it had all been set up by Hill and Knowlton, the PR company, who'd been hired by a Kuwaiti lobby group to start the war. The lies were so thin that even a brief examination would have laid them bare, but they were not laid bare by the mainstream Western media because we were all too excited about the war. No one even thought to question it. The Second Gulf War was based on yet another great falsehood, Saddam Hussein's possession of weapons of mass destruction. We never even asked what that meant. Atomic bombs, ballistic missiles with conventional warheads? We don't know, because we never asked. War fever was in the air, and at the very moment fact-checking and some fake news departments were needed, and a thorough investigation should have been happening, there was instead the frenzied excitement among reporters keen to go to war, to some dusty desert adventure where the bad guys get killed and we get to watch it and write about it. The jingoism literally at the time was like the 1800s, what you would see in the old broadsheets. And the result, of course, was a travesty in terms of lives lost or ruined, but also in terms of Western governments and the media losing trust among the public. It was a trust built through blood, sweat, and tears, mostly after the social unrest that swept the world in 1968, where a generation took to the streets from Mexico City to Paris to demand accountability, transparency, and basic common decency. The press did their bit. In the United States, they managed to help end an unjust war in Vietnam and bring down a president. Not bad. Journalists built up a lot of capital with the public during those heady days, and we've been spending the last few decades squandering it. However, now teams of researchers are, even as we talk, working in news departments, tasked with the sole aim of fact-checking and shooting down misinformation and outright fake news. And while it is the digital world making disinformation easier to make and spread, it is the same digital world that now helps us to debunk lies, whether it be in traditional information research, poring over online documents, or scanning satellite images, or just Google Maps to see if such and such really happened in that village at that time, or even if that village is where it is, or even if the village actually exists. Of course, that can't be our only job. We still have to, and I shall read from the Australia's Code of Media Ethics, to report and interpret honestly, striving for accuracy, fairness and disclosure of all essential facts, to not suppress relevant available facts or give distorting emphasis, to do our utmost to give a fair opportunity for reply. It sounds almost quaint these days, but it's important to remember that these lines cannot be crossed, and there is a place in the digital domain for real reporting. Of course, one of the big challenges is digital newsrooms now. The last one I went into, I asked anybody here with a reporting background, not 1 in 100 could put up their hands and say yes. I do see that changing as more conventional journalists move into the digital arena because they're losing their jobs in the mainstream arena. But look, these pressures are just huge at the moment. But I would say, let's not despair. I'm not sure if we can manage the digital first as well as we should, but I know that we have to because time is not on our side. We have to give up some of our cherished traditions and accept the digital world in the same way writers had to accept radio, radio had to accept television, and television has to accept the internet. Will digital platforms continue that trend we're seeing? That those platforms gave people a revulsion of war, each new step. So will digital platforms do that? I'm not sure. I'm not sure because we've got so many of the keyboard warriors now. It's feeding into the nationalists. We have so many people looking at the content and thinking, well, that's not happening to me. My world's fine. In a way, it reinforces a bigoted worldview. But we have to step up to these challenges. And the very fact that we're having this conversation here today, talking face to face at this critical juncture, means we do care as people, as a profession. We are taking these issues seriously. And we must, because how else can we act as a beacon of clarifying light in what used to simply be called the fog of war, and it now feels like the fog of the digital age. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jack Barton. Let's give a big round of applause to journalist Jack Barton again. Yes, he gave us a speech. I can tell he is the second to none in terms of his brave action as a journalist. He's the second to none that I can tell. I really appreciate his brave journey as a journalist throughout his long journey in many crisis areas and conflict and disaster areas. And from his speech, it delivered a great message to us too. And in the meantime, we have several the announcements to share. One thing is, the International Journalists Forum is running in person at Sogang University. And at the same time, many people around the world are joining us through the online, especially all participants who are joining us through YouTube, via YouTube. If you are joining us, you may more actively participate in this forum through your active messages or opinions to share with every day. You may chime in anytime with your chat as we move along in the chat box while you are watching the YouTube. So every day we will select 5 best chats, 5 best chats every day, and then those people will receive the great gift, the rosaries blessed by Pop. So we will select every evening, every day during the Congress. So don't forget the great opportunity. You may chime in anytime with your message and with your chats during your participation, either online or some people will give you a chance to speak out later after the discussion. Okay. And now we have to move on to the next presenter. The second presentation will be held by Ms. Kim Yong-me, Korea's veteran producer specialized in conflict zone. She is a representative journalist of the documentary and News Korea, made with Myanmar's dismissed reporters, and chairwoman of the External Relations Committees of the Korean Independent Producers and Directors Associations. While Mr. Jo Barton is a veteran journalist who reports the news about the urgent situations in the field, Ms. Kim Yong-me is a veteran journalist who reports the news about the pain and sorrow deep inside every war and conflict through her documentaries to make people to contemplate of the world peace. Please give her with a warm applause to the stage, ladies and gentlemen.
안녕하세요.
Good afternoon. My name is Yong-me Kim, freelance journalist here in Korea. I prepared my paper in English, but my presentation is in Korean. I tried to translate into English, but I was not able to do that last night because I didn't have enough time. But the paper is in English when you refer to the brochure. So the story that I want to talk about is the conflict that is brought about by silence. I was covering the conflict areas and I was on broadcasting work recently, so I was very busy. And the war in Ukraine was something that was not expected for me. And of course, during a war, there's always unjust things happening, but I want to share with you what I felt during my work in Ukraine and during my reporting. And I want to start off with a story of a little boy. The boy's name is Yuri Nechiporenko, and he is 14 years old. He wanted to meet with our team, our journalist team, and he lives in Bucha, Ukraine. What he wanted to tell us is that his father was murdered by Russian soldier. That's where it began. And March 17th, 11 a.m., he said, "I will never forget the place, date, and the time for the rest of his life." And he was still in shock. This boy told us about many things, and among many things, he emphasized that he was a civilian. And And I asked him whether he knew about what civilian is. And civilian is one who without guns. And my father didn't have any gun, and I didn't have a gun. And he asked me whether that falls into the definition of civilian. Of course, it is. He and his father was a civilian, but still, this tragic took place to these civilians. Let me just show you a short video clip.
영상이 플레이가 안.
Can we please play the video? But let me just continue on with my presentation while we prepare for the video clip. On March 17th, the boy was on his way to find medicine and food on a bicycle. And he and his father was moving and riding on a bicycle. And this is what happened. Could you please play the video?
Ну, подумав, що загрози більше немає йому якоїсь. І удостовірився в тому, що його нема. Почекав десь хвилин, навіть не хвилину, менше трохи, ніж хвилину. І я його не бачив і почав бігти. Не знаю, було дуже важкий психічний стан. Було дуже важко. Ось. Приймав дуже часто таблетки теж, щоб менше думати про це, бо нереально важко було.
유리의 아버지처럼 수많은 사람들이
So many people were killed in this village, Bucha. On March 30th, right after the Russian army withdrew, there were more than 400 corpses that was found, and several bodies were found with their hands tied behind their back. It is said that there were also victims who showed signs of torture. This is a massacre, and this could be an alleged war crime.
예, 저 앞에 사실 영상이 조금 더 있는데 조금 늦게 나.
There are some video clips beforehand, but I think it was it was cut off. But anyway, many people were hiding in underground shelters, and they were hurt, and many people were sick. And after seeing their suffering, Yuri and his father came out to look for medicine. And Yuri's father said, the soldiers will not shoot at us as long as they have a white flag made from a torn white cloth. But then Russian soldier shot his father, and his father was shot at their heart, and Yuri fortunately were shot but survived because the bullet went through his hoodie. He pretended to be dead, and after a while, Yuri ran away from the site. Yuri is a key witness to the genocide in Bucha. What he wants to tell us is that why do we have to be killed by the Russian troops, although we are a civilian? And when I was covering the story, I think this is the most important thing in the context of war in Ukraine. President Zelensky of Ukraine called this a genocide. And although we live in the 21st century, we are grieved to see such a genocide. European countries that suffered the Holocaust couldn't believe that this massacre actually happened. And there is more sympathy or empathy with what is happening in Ukraine. And there are many witnesses in Bucha, and Yuri is one of them. And Russia, however, said that they didn't kill a single civilian person. And journalists have the responsibility to unveil this truth. And we found the witness. and we were able to find that civilians were actually sacrificed and killed. When we were in the region, there were many corpses that was tied to their back, and they were wearing civilian clothes. And when you go through their pockets of what they owned, it was nothing close to weapons or anything that was owned by military. And there were even dead bodies with small paper that had grocery list in their pocket. Will these people be military personnel? I don't think so. They cannot be a military soldier. When we think about genocide, we often think about genocide that took place in the Second World War. That was the memory that we have of such genocide. The humankind suffered much sacrifices in World War I and II, and we created UN as a result of such a tragedy, and we created Geneva Conventions. The Geneva Convention was signed on August 12, 1949, and the goal was to protect the victims of war, and this includes civilians and also those who are vulnerable. Humankind in the past had had so many different wars, and this convention was born out of humanity's reflection of the tragedy that took place in the past. And in this convention, the DPRK and Somalia is also part of this convention. They signed this convention, and we have an absolute obligation to comply and abide by this convention. This is the picture when the convention was signed. So many countries agreed to the convention and signed off on the convention. And whenever I go out and to cover stories, I always show this picture. No one can kill civilians. That's the basic principle that cannot be compromised. If this basic principle cannot be adhered, we will be going against the way forward peace. And when we were covering in the field, there are a lot of confusions like fake news. However, this convention, which is a reflection of what we learned in World War I and II, this is something that we have to comply with. And if we cannot abide by this, there should be consequences. And the topic of documentary and news has this principle as a basis. And I always think about what it means to coexist as a humankind. We also have criminal charges as well. If there is genocide and if there is war crime, there is international law, and it is brought to court under International Criminal Court. And there is International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg and Karovnovsk war crimes trials, and International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, as well as Sierra Leone. And there are systems in place to bring justice to war crimes. And we have International Criminal Court and International Criminal Law already in place. So the system is there. However, this kind of international system is not working. And why is it not working today? And why do we have to have so many sacrifices in Ukraine? And I started asking this question. So we have unprotected citizens. And what I saw in Ukraine is that for civilians, civilians were killed unarmed in most cases. Unarmed civilians were shot by military forces. It's a coward act. All the massacre and genocide that took place in Ukraine and Bucha was an assault or violence on unarmed civilian by armed military forces. A person with a gun can kill hundreds of people, and for those people without a gun cannot protect themselves. That's what we mean by civilians. So for soldiers to kill civilian, it is illegal, and it's against the law, and it's a war crime. And even if this one civilian in Ukraine was killed, Russia's war cannot be justified no matter what. When you look at all these dead bodies, no one can say that anyone should be in the black plastic bag as a dead body. No one can justify that. No one should imagine that. And when I go to the war zone, I always see this kind of dead body. And this could be anyone. It could be anyone in my family. It could be, and no one would want to be in that place. And why are they there? No one wanted them to be, but it was inevitable. And this was taking place because of a huge war crime. And this cannot be accepted by anyone. If my body was there, and if I was to see that with my own eyes, could anyone even think about bringing war into a country? And that's something I want to speak to the citizen of the world. The sacrifices of the war and damages of the war, you probably saw through media, through videos, but the damages of war is broad, and it's more than you think. And there's a story about a citizen whose apartment was bombed, and the person was saving for 10 years to buy the apartment, and half of it is mortgaged. And this house was blown away by the bombing of Russian soldiers. And this person was at a loss and couldn't find a way to compensate for the past decades of working hard. And what she told me was, do not buy a house. And if you buy a house, you will be like me. And she said that I saved for this apartment in vain. And also, children are not going to school, and that is also a violence of war. And the war is happening between adults, but kids are not able to go to school. And what can we do? What should we do? And it's not that these students cannot go to school because there's a war that was broken, but they should still be able to learn. So the damages from war is destruction of day-to-day life. That's the result of war, and that's something that is not counted in statistics when we think about the damages from war. And despite this being the fact, why is this war continuing? And I think it's coming from the indifferences from journalists and people. There has been a lot of events that took place within just today. But then, because our day-to-day life is more important, we kept silent to these atrocities happening around the world. And Syrian civil war is thought as a past story, and it's not covered in the news if more than 100 people die. But still, as we speak, many civilians in Syria is dying. And just like they have practiced a war, I mean, Russia participated in the Ukraine's war, and we have to, if we were taking interest in Syria in the early days of war, I don't think the war would have been proliferating as much as we see today. Same for Myanmar. Many citizens protested against the military, but UN is not responding. And I think that's happening because of the indifference taking place from the global communities. And more than thousands of people were killed by the gun from Myanmar's junta, but not many are still interested in what is happening there. And there has been execution that took place to pro-democracy activists last month. In Korea, we had a similar event. In Hyuk Party event was where the pro-democratic activists were killed in death penalty. And the media, the citizens, we cannot be silenced to what is happening in Myanmar. If we keep our silence, there will be more death penalty that will take place in Myanmar. And while we keep silence to these unjust activities, there are dictatorships that are out to launch wars, and they will get more hints that it is okay to engage in this kind of atrocities, and they will go into actually executing this kind of wars and conflict. Because if there is no accusations, formal or political accusations, they will continue on with this kind of war, and this is a way for us to show that we are for war if we don't act anything. And citizens of Myanmar and people of Myanmar wanted me to deliver that they're still fighting at this very moment. When I told them about my speech here in SIGNIS Congress, if we were to create more news and if we were to create more reportings and journalists, if more journalists cover this, we'll be able to increase their voice to be heard. Rather than being silenced to the war, we have to vocally speak out about the violence happening in the war, not just in Myanmar, but we have to speak about what is happening in Syria. And we can also tell that story through social media. In World War I or II, we didn't have a media outlet, but today we have very strong tools like the internet and digital tools. And the situation has improved since World War I and II. Still, citizens still live and continue on with their lives in silence based on what they prefer and because of their day-to-day life. And we have to fully leverage digital tools and internet to share these stories and to show empathy with what is happening around the world. And I think that will positively influence the peace in the world. Human beings now have great tools in our hand. That is the digital devices. We have evolved so much from the ancient times. We have the tools in place for peace in the world. And at this very moment, we have the tool to speak about the injustice that is happening around the world through war and violence. It's not too late to speak of that. These victims could be your family and friends. And as the same human being, we have to act to protect human dignity. And we hope that you can work with us toward that noble work.
Yeah, for a while, a little bit speechless. A big round of applause to journalist Kim Yong-me again for her great presentation. It was touched a lot, but we must not be just touched. What's the next? Maybe as a journalist, we need to think about it. What's the next? What I need to do for us for this moment. Maybe that is what she wants to deliver. Okay, we could understand which kind of role we should take and perform to protect the communal goodness called peace through her documentaries that showed us the fields of wars and conflicts where the value of the peace was needed the most. Thank you very much. Okay, we had two presenters' speeches so far. The next speaker, in this digital era, maybe this year, for the first time, we are running the SIGNIS World Congress 22 as the mixed platform, as the mixed media platform. So maybe this is the one way to meet another speaker via Zoom. The next speaker is Mr. Cedric Alviani. He is the head of the East Asia branch of the Reporters Without Borders, an international non-profit and non-governmental organization. The Reporters Without Borders is an international non-governmental organization that was founded in France in 1985. They now stand at the front line to protect the human rights of reporters and the extension of freedom for media around the world. Since 2002, the Press Freedom Index for each nation has been rated through complex criteria every year. This index is sometimes treated as the standard to realize the essence of the press in the name of the freedom of thoughts and expression. Mr. Cedric Alviani is currently in Taiwan, and he couldn't attend the forum due to Taiwan's COVID-19 quarantine measures. So that's another the reflection of our reality during the pandemic. We therefore invite him to join the forum through Zoom. So let's meet him. Hello.
Hello, hello everyone.
Our
Thank
audience,
you very much for.
our audience is giving you a big applause.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it sounds
It's
like
my pleasure.
you can listen very well because you are responding with the greetings. It's very nice to meet you, even online, via Zoom.
Yes, it's my pleasure to meet you. Unfortunately, I couldn't go to Korea since 3 years now, and I wish there is a time when the quarantine measures are lifted and I have an opportunity to visit Korea again. Unfortunately, today I had to stay based in Taipei. But I want to thank you for organizing this very meaningful event, and I want to thank Kim Yong-me for her presentation, which is such a lively illustration of why we need journalists and why journalists are a tool to preserve peace in the world. Please go to the next slide.
Yes, so you may then just start. Okay, let's listen to his presentation.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very thankful you already introduced Reporters Without Borders, so I will be very fast on the introduction of our NGO, but we defend freedom of the press and the right of the people to information. It's become quite a large NGO, and we have a bureau in the East Asia that allows us to have very close relationship with South Korea and provide a lot of documents in Korean language. We also have international partnership with international organizations like the UN or UNESCO and Council of Europe. We can go to the next slide. Yes. We mentioned the World Press Freedom Index, which is our major advocacy tool. Every year we rank every country on earth regarding the level of efficiency of freedom of the press, and I will mention later why it is so important for the preservation of peace. Next slide. Yeah. In our work, we publish advocacy documents, and you will find on our website a certain number of investigative reports. I chose those we published in recent years on the East Asia. No surprise, a lot of them are talking about the situation in China that is particularly serious in terms of press freedom. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, thank you. But we also have services on the ground. Every year we are training hundreds of reporters to their physical safety and their online safety. We also have opened emergency assistance center. This one is in Ukraine. We currently have two journalism centers in Ukraine, one in city of Kiev and one in the city of Lviv. And you can see like we are working on delivering equipment to journalists who report in wartime, like bulletproof jackets, helmets, and other equipment, which we hope could be life-saving at some point of their mission. Next slide, please. Okay, so now let's go to our topic, why journalism is so important for peace. Let's see the basic of journalism first. There is no democracy without journalism. In any system, you need to have a mirror, an independent way to assess if the system is working. Companies, for example, do this through external audit. Why external? Because if you're part of the system, you cannot assess if the system is working. And even in democracies, human being is a human being, and there is a permanent temptation of conflict of interest at every level of the society. And without independent journalism, without investigations, most of these conflicts of interest that plague the system, that plague the power of the people, would go unnoticed. So it's extremely important that journalists are present in the society. The purpose of journalists is very easy, is to bring facts. Without facts, one cannot use their critical thinking. It's just as simple as this. Even in democracies, information control is power. And if the people want to have the power they deserve, then they must receive information to be able and exert this power. So what is journalism and is not journalism? I think I used the word fact, and this is the most important. Without facts, this is not journalism. If I'm trying to put an opinion in your brain, it is public relations, it is communication, it is advertising, it is propaganda, but it is not journalism. Journalism only is journalism if it works for the benefit of the public and not for the benefit of other parties. And of course, journalism has to respect the basics to verify facts, sources, separate opinions and facts. So every time in this presentation I will refer to journalism, I will refer to independent journalism as described. Well, because journalists are on the side of the people, sometimes against the government, sometimes against private companies, sometimes against lobbies. They are everywhere in the world a target. Over the past 3 decades, not less than 1,500 journalists have been killed, and 500 journalists are currently detained, mostly by governments. I mentioned 1,500 journalists killed. Actually, the majority is not being killed during war or armed conflict, but they are being killed sometimes at home or in the street because they represent a threat for some powers. Journalism and democracy are so much linked that authoritarian powers, and especially China and Russia, are trying to change the definition of journalism and replace it by a word that would make it similar to state propaganda. We have to be very careful. Journalism is never state propaganda. The purpose of journalism is never to support the state policies. It is actually to know what's missing, what's the problem with state policies. Yeah. And for this reason, even in democracies, journalists are being harassed. And you all know, of course, the cases of Julian Assange or Chelsea Manning. So in democracies, the people have to unite to defend journalism. Not to say that every reporter is great, that every media is perfectly respectful of any ethical rule, but it's the best tool the people have to confront their government. It's the best tool they have to protect themselves against abuse of their rights. So if journalism is not perfect, let's work on making it perfect. But we cannot just trash it, because without journalism, there's no democracy. Next slide, please. Yeah. So in period of war, disinformation is a weapon. It has always been on both sides, but of course, primarily on the side of the invader. When there is clearly an invader, disinformation is used to justify the war. When I say disinformation, it's what people call fake news, the creation of information that is not based on facts and that goes against facts. So the purpose of governments using disinformation is to create an enemy, to turn the people from another country, another region, into an enemy. They have to brainwash the people to make them believe these people are the enemy. Even with democracies, we have seen the UK and US falsely accusing a country like Iraq of detaining massive destruction weapons, which later was proven false. So this is very regularly used to justify going to war. In the case of the current attack on Ukraine, Russia pretends they are maintaining peace, which is another way to justify going to war, and always based on false information, always based on manipulation. Manipulate the public opinion. This is the actual purpose of disinformation, and especially in time of war. The government wants to bring up patriotism, or use patriotism, or sometimes use faith to push the people to support policies that justify going to war. They are going to use images taken outside their context to target the public's emotions, so to make sure that the public is not going to think, but that they are going to feel upset and they will support war. And it is so powerful, this information, that it has in the past triggered genocides. We all heard of the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, where a radio station that were, of course, not doing journalism, but that were disguised as media, actually triggered a genocide by actually doing all these evil actions I just mentioned to create hatred and to target the crowd to attack on the Tutsi population. So, last, disinformation is used by governments to cover up war crimes. They are going to try and minimize casualties in the other camp, so that they do not look like an aggressor. Also minimize casualties in their own camp sometimes to make the people believe they are winning the war, while actually they are not winning the war. They will, of course, try to question the reality of war crimes, and whenever it is proven, whenever it is impossible to deny because there's images, they are going to try and attribute war crimes to the other camp. So disinformation is a war weapon, and it is absolutely capital to have journalists so that we can fight against disinformation in period of war. Next slide, please. Yes. So what does journalism for peace? The first thing is that journalism allows the people to debunk propaganda. Journalism is providing facts. And when you hear the belligerents' narratives, it is usually not based on facts, it is based on ideals, it is based on beliefs, it is based on a partial information. So by collecting facts on the ground, but also on other places, not necessarily on the war theater, journalists allow the people, the citizens from the belligerent parties to better evaluate if a war is really necessary, and to better understand how the war could be avoided. A second point is that journalists and the media give a tribune to those who denounce war on both sides. And this is very important because in any conflict, the majority of population is very rarely supportive. But actually, governments and parties at stake are very actively trying to suppress the voice of those who want to reject war, and they only give a tribune to those who support war. Actually, in we can see the case actually in Russia currently have been, as long as they could be broadcasted, very important to denounce war. And also, journalist investigations allow to identify those individuals, politicians, private companies that really benefit from war, because very often behind a war and its ideological justification, there are some economic interests or other interests. Yeah. Journalists also help to disseminate facts about the reality of the conflict. They provide accurate information on casualties, and especially the civilian victims that the armies always try to hide, of course. They allow the world to bypass censorship, because on both sides, belligerents are trying to keep in control of information on what happens. And most important, and I believe Kim Yong-me mentioned this earlier, they humanize the people. Propaganda tries to dehumanize the enemy, make them animals, make them cockroaches, make them something to destroy. And journalists tells you stories of people who suffer on both sides, and this is also a very powerful tool against the war. So I will finish with the last role of journalists, which is to alert the international opinion. Reportings might trigger peacekeeping or diplomatic operations that would support peace, that could put an end to the war. They also collect the testimony of all the victims of violence, and we have seen in the past, starting from World War II, journalistic works have been used as documents to judge criminals, war criminals, and crimes against humanity. So for all these reasons, I encourage you as much as possible to support journalists and use all your power to make sure that governments allow journalists to keep staying on the field, keep reporting, despite the difficulty, because now they have become targets very often. But without journalists, you would just see the beautiful pictures of jet fighters, of the Navy. You would just see beautiful uniforms, and you would never see the blood. It's very important that journalists show us the blood, so that the international opinion would mobilize and would put an end as much as possible to war. Thank you. And yes, and you can show the last slide if some of you want to know more about Reporters Without Borders. Here's the next one. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, he will be back during the discussion.
Yes, sure.
Okay, Despite the different situation due to the COVID-19, the pandemic situation, thank you for his presentation through Zoom with maybe I believe he's listening. We cannot even though we cannot see his online participation. The SIGNIS World Congress seems to fulfill its main topic, the peace in the digital world, as it is. Before we will have a short break, but before having the break, I have some announcements and the message that I want to share with. During three people's presentation and the special interview, while listening all those programs, we had some messages from in the chat box from the YouTube the participants. One of them is. This is the great motivation to think about what I need to do for the communal goodness. Silence and indifference seems to cause another war. So we should make an awareness of this for peace. That's from Serminago. And the other person's message is from Again the Gospel. The name is Again the Gospel. I try not to forget Myanmar and Syria. And the other message that I want to share with is the message from Boyoung Tae's mom. Throughout the ceaseless efforts and the reporting from journalists and their records, we can reveal any fake news. And I appreciate your reporting in spite of a difficult situation, taking risk. Those are three messages that I want to share with while listening to those presentations. And again, during your participation in person, and especially some people who are watching this International Journalist Forum online via Zoom, you may leave any messages, and also you may chime in with your the opinion and message as we move along. And we will select 5 best messages every day, and in the evening we will select them every day during the Congress, and we will give the special gifts, the rosaries blessed by Pop. So that is waiting for you, so you may feel free to join. Also, we will have a 15-minute break, so it's 4:17. After 15 minutes, we will be back here for the discussion. And you may take your time for break for coffee and some refreshments. And also in the meantime, at room 215 on the same floor, this the second floor, we are holding a Catholic art exhibition titled The Fruits of Our Prayers. The Fruits of Our Prayers. The works are created by professional artists specializing in Catholic arts. There are numerous beautiful work. The wooden art pieces are the Stations of the Cross and are made with discarded wood from Gyeongbok Palace that you've been to yesterday. And also, when they were remodeling the sites, the material was based on that. So please take some time to take a look the beautiful artwork. That will be a great opportunity for you. And yes, with the refreshment, have a good break, and I will see you in 15 minutes. And also, people who are watching this forum online, please stay with us. We'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you. please be seated and set your phone to vibrate or mute. The second part of the International Journalists Forum will start very soon. I hope we are not running over our time for waiting. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask your cooperation. Please be seated and check your cell phone modes. We have several programs followed by this, so we hope not to be running out of our time. So please be seated.
The voice of the journalism has been and will be an ongoing reflection of the present time. Since the very beginning, the journalism has served to be a monitor and checker while being a listener to the weakest voice of the world. Journalists have always been the first to arrive at scenes farthest away from peace. At war or conflict zones, or scenes of discord and feud, we were always the first, rushing and running. That is why the voice of the journalism has been more of a voice of crisis like wars, conflicts, and natural disasters, rather than that of peace. Of course, sometimes the journalism has also stepped up to be not only a loudspeaker of conflicts, but also a desperate call for peace. The reason of being of the journalism is to announce the dawn of hope earlier than anyone else in the world. The journalism should also be the first to declare a peace to be enjoyed by everyone while singing tunes of new era that is coming. What roles has the journalism been playing to realize peace, common good, for all of us? Now let us seek ways for the future among us journalism community committed to securing a value of peace.
Now, we will begin the second part of the International Journalist Forum, which is initiated at the SIGNIS World Congress 2022 for the first time. Now, the second part is the discussion. Discussion will be proceeded with a common question. If I have for all, but if I don't have enough time, So I will ask the individual question to each presenter. On the screen, actually, you saw another presenter whose name is Ms. Colleen Dewley. She actually was supposed to be here. She is the sub-editor of America Media. That is the oldest Jesuit magazine located in the U.S. They report the Vatican news and analyze that from the Catholic perspective and deliver the news through the digital throughout the world. So it will be a great opportunity to listen to her voice in terms of the Catholic side and also in terms of the media side and also from the young generation's perspective because one of the strategies to approach the other target audience for their magazine is to target the young voice through their podcasts and so on. But I'm so sorry not to have you in person, not to have her in person here. So her situation is like the procession of the SIGNIS World Congress 22, because we were supposed to hold that last year in August, but due to COVID-19, we had to be flexible the format several times. We postponed 1 year, and then from in-person to hybrid, and finally the limited in-person and the hybrid and the media mix platform. Like that, she was supposed to be here. She was willing to join here and very enthusiastic to meet all of you. But she is 4 months pregnant situation, and just a couple of days ago to check her medical condition before the long flight, then she had some unpleasant news about her health condition. So she promised to join online, but sadly, last night we had an urgent news from her. She is now hospitalized urgently. So maybe for the detailed message, you may refer the book from her, our handout, the book about her presentation. And also, I would like to ask you to pray for her so that she can continue to her the mission to deliver this news. Okay, that was a little bit long introduction, but we better know the other presenter's situation. Okay, now thank you. Now I would like to introduce and welcome our 3 presenters here again. The first, Mr. Jack Barton, first presenter, and the journalist Kim Yong-me, and also she's the documentary producer, the second presenter. And the third presenter is Mr. Cedric Alviani. Is he on? Okay. Let's say hello again. All right.
Hello, I'm still here.
Yes, okay. I'm glad you are still safe. All right. Today, because we don't have so much time, I will ask the individual question first. What do you want to get first? Individual question or group question? Like a pick a choice. Okay, individual question. I will give the individual question first. Mr. Jack Barton, you mentioned the part of the reality of covering news stories that the media and journalists face. Among them, maybe this is a really critical issue that actually drives many journalists to report unwanted, involuntary stories on competing digital platforms to negotiate between reality and his or her professionalism as a journalist. Also, due to the reality that you mentioned, sometimes even among news reporters in the same news outlets, if some reporters try to report with a different angle about a certain subject from other media's views. The news desk editor, this is a very practical issue, but the news desk edits or the news is killed by the broadcast journalist tone, then in these dilemmas as a journalist at the front line, what kind of solutions could you realistically and possibly suggest?
This is really difficult. It's so complicated. Can you all hear me on this mic? Is that it? I work for a lot of different people, and I also work for Chinese media. And a colleague in China said to me, you know, it's easy for us because we know what propaganda is. It's what the Politburo tells us to do, and it filters down. So we know it's propaganda. The problem you've got in your media is your propaganda is in your head. It's your own cultural bias, and you don't even realize what you're doing. And it's kind of like a hit on the chin, but it's sort of right. And I definitely saw that because I covered the whole 2 decades of the war on terror from beginning to end. And it was a travesty in terms of Western media, particularly the English language, the Anglo-Saxon media, whether it's the UK, Australia, New Zealand, or the United States. It was we did a terrible job, and we lost so much trust. I'd like to think I didn't do a terrible job, but I'm sure I did feed into it in some point because you're caught up in the zeitgeist. And I just think the main area of correction is, as Cedric was mentioning before, these basic fundamental tenets of what journalism is, never departing from them. Or when I brought up the Australian Code of Journalist Ethics before, it's just to go back and remind yourself, what is it? What is the job I'm doing? What is it that separates me from the blogger or, you know, the person who is reporting something on the spot but doesn't have the tools, doesn't have the training? What is my training? A lot of us forget that. It's a bit of a joke. I remember once I went around to a bunch of colleagues and said, name me 3 rules on the code of ethics. And of course, nobody could. And of course, I couldn't remember either, but I didn't tell them that. This is the problem. We need to constantly refresh ourselves if we're to keep credibility. And I think sometimes it comes down to something as simple as that. Now, of course, it gets a whole lot more complicated because we're in this digital world. And the one thing I was talking about it with the chap just before is the fact that the other half of the equation is how people receive information. I think 80% of the problem at the moment is we are overwhelmed with information. We have a limited amount of processing power. And if, as I was saying to the chap before, if I woke up in the morning and had a glass of wine and I sat on the toilet and had another glass of wine and walked down the stairs with a glass of wine and said hello to the kids with another glass of wine, you'd say, hey, you've got a problem. And that's what we do with our phones every day, and no one is saying to us, hey, you've got a problem. We're overloading our heads with information, and there's actually a finite amount of processing power our brains have each day to memorize and process information. That's part of the problem, as receiving information. Now, the other part, of course, is us making sure we're giving out good quality meals and not a sugar buzz, which is what a lot of news is these days, as Dimitri was talking about before. So that's a complicated answer, but I hope it touches on what I think are some of the core issues in order to restore credibility and to do our job well again, and for people to receive the information and be able to form their own opinions with some sort of intellectual vigor.
Okay, thank you. Actually, that's a very critical question, but actually it's hard to find an answer, a clear answer, because of the reality. So it sounds like you threw the ball to each journalist find the answer. But I will keep that word, restore credibility and good quality meal, what you're gonna find.
Not the sugar buzz.
Yes. Okay, thank you. The next question I would like to ask to journalist Kim. From your impressive career in conflict areas, sometimes your gender seems to be more highlighted than your work itself as Korea's leading world reporters. The research index shows women journalists were the hardest in Afghanistan, but I believe it is not just limited to only that area. Many areas around the world. We have often been told that the women journalists confront additional challenges when they report in conflict zones. So in particular, filming documentaries generally takes longer than news reports that requires taking risk while trying to approach different parts of crisis zones. So perhaps you might not want to be highlighted with your gender as a journalist to report in the war zone. Nonetheless, do you want to address any words in this matter?
제가 사실
Well, because I'm a female journalist, woman journalist, I think it worked to my benefit rather than against it, because many are religious people. When you go to Middle East or Afghanistan or Middle East region, I believe we have to fully respect the culture of the country. So when I was in Afghanistan, I think I visited Afghanistan 8 times for news coverage, and they wear burqa. It's their traditional clothes. So I always wore burqa. And although I am not Islam, and I try to ask questions regarding their religion, Islam. So when we cover stories, it's always best to get acquaintance with a religious figure. So I always follow this religious figure in the town to get his advice. And they had this stance where they want to protect female and women. So because of this help from the religious figure, I was able to cover Taliban, and I was able to cover their military training site. So because I was women, they opened up. So they respected me as a journalist. And when I went to Syria, people in IS, I was able to meet a high official at IS, and the high official at IS is a retired military personnel from Iraq. So I was able to cover them. When I talked to them, because I was a woman, they tried to protect me because I am a woman. When you look at a country's custom, and when you look at their culture, they're more emotionally attached or emotionally more tolerant to open to women. And I think all the more critical is to learn about the culture of that country. When you go in to the country, usually the business trip, the trip is short. It's within a month. But then when I was there to report a story, I prefer staying there for a couple of months to learn about the region. So the way to distinguish a true story versus propaganda is you have to be on the ground for a long period of time to fully cover the story. And I think that's my approach when I try to cover a story. And when you look at these war zones and conflict zones, there are more journalists coming from West. So they had this curiosity for journalists coming from the East and their value for family, their siblings, and the friendship. These were some of the values that they really cared about. So I emphasized that, and I used these kind of important themes to really converse with them and talk with them. So I was actually welcomed to this community because I'm woman.
Here are some positive parts to report as a woman journalist, female journalist. Maybe this time to Mr. Cedric Alviani. Can you listen?
Yes.
Yes. The media sustainability is one of the key subjects that Reporters Without Borders pursue, what do you think is required to build a suitable media environment in order to fulfill this? Also, what is required of a journalist as well? The Beijing media environment is very important, but also I believe there need both sides of efforts, from the media environmental factor and at the same time the responsibility to be required to journalists. What's your thought?
Well, thank you. I think we could talk for hours about this domain, because that's a key issue recently. What to start with? We advocate for freedom of the press, but personally, I do not like so much that wording freedom of the press, because it's very often misunderstood by members of the public as freedom of the media to impart whatever content they want. And this is not what is freedom of the press. Freedom of the press is the freedom of the people, of citizens, of the public to receive accurate, unbiased, factual information that can help them as citizens to make educated decisions. And clearly, in the world, the current media environment does not provide this benefit, at least for the vast majority of people. And even in democracies, it doesn't work so well. There's many reasons. Of course, the fact that the economy has moved online, the fact that the media have lost a lot of advertising resources, that now social media have somehow took over the traditional roles of the media that used to make a lot of money, like carrying advertising. So the media are clearly in a crisis. But I would say that's not all. My analysis is that since the media ever exists, there always has been a permanent conflict of interest. You wanted to operate a big TV station, operate a big print media, you needed political connections, you needed investors. So there were already red lines, there were already topics you couldn't easily touch. And this has remained. And even in democracies, many media are actually cash machines for their owners and do not care so much of the public good. So who can change things? Of course, we need better policies. We need not only government policies, but we need a system that would force media owners to better respect ethics. Because journalists, of course, in every country, they wish they can, but if their management does not let them, if they not have this possibility, they are just employees. They need to make a living. So the people must mobilize to get a better media system through better policies, but also by choosing, and yeah, I will go back to the metaphor that was used earlier, by choosing the food they eat. We are being overwhelmed by very poor quality information. Do we really have to eat this? I don't think so. Do you have to watch the evening news while having dinner? No, you don't have to. Do you have to listen to the news everywhere, all the time? No, you don't have to. Do you have to read unreliable news reports online? You don't have to. So I would say, let's start, since we're citizens, we want to be responsible by choosing one media that we believe in, because it's close, because the people who work for this media are transparent with what they do, and we pay for it. It just might be a couple of bucks a month. It's not a lot, but when you pay for your media, you're in control of somehow what you are going to receive as an information. Just like you wouldn't eat some trash food you find in the streets. You don't have to listen to some trash information because it's for free. So this is something that everyone has to mobilize. But like I said in my presentation, there is no democracy without journalism, and the people need to have facts allowing to make educated decisions. So we have to have quality journalism. We have to fight for this.
Okay, thank you. So it is very very good comparison and the interesting comparison between our choice about the media news and the food that we consume and the feed every day. So that delivers very clearly to think about. If I don't know if we have enough time, so before moving on, I would like to give one common question to all presenters. But before giving the question, just quickly, I'm not asking one more question because journalist Kim is the female. Just one quickly, because as Mr. Dmitry also highlighted, from the interview with Mr. Muratov, he claimed the independent fund for independent media so that they can constantly speak out their voices. So you, in fact, founded the media company that can use Korea in Myanmar with the reporters who lost their jobs last year. So I can imagine everything from the founding to current operation is not easy. So would you please briefly share it like a case study for other journalists?
네, 제가 그 미얀마에서
Well, when there was a military coup in Myanmar, all the media were dissolved. So for me, it was unimaginable to think that all the media outlets were dissolved. And if military were to dissolve all the media, then I thought to myself, I'm going to find and set up a new media outlet. So I hired 12 reporters, including the cameramen or camera reporters, and I guaranteed and paid salary for all of them, and they had nowhere to go because they were just fired from their media outlet. And they wanted to write, even if it means writing for social media. So there were many applicants, but then my company were only able to cover 12 people's salary. So that's why I recruited and hired 12 journalists, and we covered and wrote many stories. And the stories and the pictures, they were wired media, and we provided the stories and pictures for free of charge so that they can use this as their source. So this was sort of like a non-profit organization for me. And it was same for Ukraine. So I plan to continue expanding my branches. And I think that media outlets should not make money. They should not be creating profit. Because in order for me to freely cover any news stories, no one should be able to influence me. I have to be completely independent. If that's the case, I would be in a very risky situation. I would be in danger. So I am for non-profit news outlets. So whether it's a women journalist or whether it's a journalist with disability, many can apply to my company, and they will be able to have an opportunity to work. And I think by doing so, we'll be able to cover the voices of those who are at the margin society. So it could be from any other countries, and I welcome anyone. So please apply for my news outlet.
Right. And also there can be another answer from the question that I posed to the Jack Barton too. Okay, so maybe this seems to be the last question to the presenters, to all. Now the world can be connected as one digital community. However, the divide between the digitally rich and poor is increasing heavily as this digital age continues to develop. In order to find a solution to overcome these barriers, it is vital to approach approach them from the global community perspective with a broadened mindset. You all have been reporting across the world, across the continents. So maybe this might be the good question to all of you to think about. So I believe that this requires journalists to broaden your mindset within the same context. So my question is, would you like to hear, I would like to hear from all the speakers if there are any ways that you can propose to apply this perspective. Okay, who can start? Maybe Ja or Cedric? You want to start first?
Yeah.
Okay, he raised his hands.
Yes.
Okay.
I had a remark on the non-profit media that's a very interesting model, and I can see that actually everywhere in the world there are, thanks to the internet, some small media creating that register very often as non-profit organizations that pride themselves to be transparent on their sources of funding. And to me, this is the type of media in the future. The giant media, let's say the 20th century media, has already disappeared because all services they provided that were more like entertainment or classifieds, this type of services have been taken by the internet. So now media have to focus more on investigation and matters that are really important for the people. And I believe that non-profit is a model that has a future in journalism, and that should be encouraged, including in public policies.
Okay, thank you. That's one good suggestion. What about Jag? What do you think about it?
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's hard to tell right now because we're at such a juncture as to where we're going. It's kind of like we're in the middle of it right now. And the divisions that we see that are being fed by it's part of the rise of the digital platforms. We used to have divides where there'd be one or two or maybe three opinions, but now it's like society has been dropped like a vase onto the ground and shattered into 1,000 pieces. And we have to ask, how do we put that back together? And a part of it is the way we move forward, I think, with digital platforms, and it is finding that new voice for journalism within the digital platforms, because the way it's working right now, where they act as an appendage onto a regular newsroom, and they just sort of scoop up the articles that come through and change them around, and very few people in there actually have a media background, that doesn't really work, and I think that just feeds into the sense of distrust. So we've got to take that jump. I've got to say personally, I don't like working in digital media. I'm an old school dinosaur. I almost wish I'd gone out before this age, but the fact is you have to bite the bullet. You have to realize that's where people are getting their news from. They're not watching the television. They're not picking up newspapers. And so either you take that leap and you dive in or you don't. And I think we have to do it. But as I say, we're not sort of past the point or whatever. We're right in the middle of it now. So we have to reinvent journalism in the digital age as this thing is in motion.
Thank you. Because we don't have much time, I'll just quickly move to Kim. Yes.
네, 제가
When I was reporting in Egypt, the teens that I met there asked me, in your country, do you select the pharaoh with your fingers? This was referring to the election process. So I asked them, where did you learn that? And they said they learned through the internet. These were people who had never done an election before. They have never voted before, and they understood this concept of democracy, even if they were not able to express it in words or terminologies. So 10 years, 20 years down the road, this type of transformation is occurring. And this is, I believe, in my opinion, this is a revolution for humankind. Authoritarian powers controlling journalism? Can we say no to that? Can we resist it? For example, if all of the media outlets in Russia were to actually move away from the current stance of making comments that are pro-Russian and against Ukraine, if they were able to actually say something in a neutral perspective, then things may not go in Putin's way. So for all independent elements within journalism, for that to function properly, what do we have to do? Even on individual piece-by-piece basis, we have to be able to deliver the fact-based information. There are many citizens out there who are working and acting as reporters on the internet, and they learn about the trends on an international level, even though they don't know how to read. They're illiterate, but they see things, videos on the internet. So we are at a point in time where it's a revolution about to occur. But for this to have a positive effect, we need independent journalism. Fake news or propaganda, we can move away from that if this was allowed to happen. I have never thought that I wanted to work as a part of a company. I don't want to be an employee of a company. I want to be a true journalist, which means that I want to be able to freely report on things based upon an analysis that I've made based on a collection of facts that I see actually out there. There's a lot of things we can cover. And there's a lot of challenges like poverty. I don't get to be promoted, for example. These are the challenges that we have to accept if we want to go down this path. We cannot make compromises. Those types of basic principles, if you're able to abide by that, then in the future, even in nonprofit, I believe journalism can thrive in the future. So it's like I'm doing an experiment right now with my life. And if this works out, then in the future we may be able to see more independent journalism.
The wise answers, three of the presenters' answers are all very thoughtful and deep, the wise answers that we may think about. And now, if we have enough time, maybe we can ask so many questions. Maybe you want to ask too. But I would like to move on to our audience voice to listen. I believe the audience also wants to ask some questions to them. I don't know how many questions I can take. But in the meantime, actually, I had a couple of questions from the live chat. One person, Deepal Vangsong, his question is to Mr. Muratov. Why hate culture spreads faster than peace culture? If I can send this question to him, I will certainly do. And also, another question is to Mr. Cedric Alviani, to ask if he can explain why hate propaganda spreads faster than peace propaganda. That's his question. But maybe from our audience today who's attending in person might have some voices to speak out or to ask questions. I would like to get the question from the audience first, and if we have time, I will take this question too. Okay, if there anybody who wants to give some comments or ask a question. Okay. Would you please introduce yourself first? Just a name and very short introduction and question.
Thank you very much.
And please speak loudly.
Thank you very much. I'm Andrew Kaufa. I come from Malawi, but I'm based in Kenya. I work as a coordinator for communications in the Eastern Africa region. I'm interested to give my input on the question of ethical practice, as our presenters have discussed, and my contribution is probably contextual. I I begin by saying that when I was in school, the teacher of media ethics, when he was introducing the course, he told us in class that I'm teaching you media ethics, but I don't think you practice ethically. I thought he was joking. When I started practicing, I came to realize that actually that was true. Why is it true? It's because most of the unethical practices in the media houses are not so much about our employees, but the owners. And especially in the context of Africa, where people are interested in making money, the ownership matters a lot when it comes to ethical practice of the employees. I therefore would wish to see our media houses, especially us who are media owners, to take up a role and say, how can we help the young people, the young journalists who are joining this profession, to help them that they become ethical in their practice? Because it's really a big problem when they are employed in an institution run by people who are, whose owners are unethical. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. Yeah, it's a great question to think about the ethical practice, especially to deliver that to the young, to help young people who pursue the professional journalist in terms of this too. So is there anybody who wants to address this? Cedric or Jack or Kim? Okay, yeah, Jack, yeah. Yeah.
This is a really difficult topic. I've worked in a lot of places, and some places, you know, when I used to work in Cambodia a lot, I was based out of Bangkok for 10 years, and journalism had just slid to the point where you couldn't call it journalism anymore. Like, people wouldn't turn up for an interview unless they were getting paid, and it was just so endemic. But there are times, I know of other times, when you have a critical mass of reporters within an organization, and it doesn't need to go public, but you know, I can think of 2 occasions where we all said, either you fix this or we all walk out en masse. Like we all, but it's hard to find that critical mass. But if you can find that critical mass, normally there can be change, unless it really is a media outlet that has just a purely political orientation, or, you know, the owner is really driving, then they'll just sack everyone and hire a group of people who, you know, do it. It is, I don't think there's an easy answer for that. But the thing is, you can't step across the line. So if you have your own personal principles, you just can't ever betray them. Like, dignity is something that when you give it away, it's really hard to get back again. And once you cross that line as a journalist, it'll always be there. You know, you can't. So yeah, as individuals we can act, and if we find like-minded individuals, we can band together and call for action. And I you know, maybe Cedric has, he probably deals with this a lot more often. He might have a good, from an organizational perspective, but I just think when it comes back to the individual, you know, taking action, remaining true to yourself, these are really important things to do.
Okay, I think that, yeah, it was good thoughts and maybe good enough to give some thought to think more about it. So because we have some other programs followed up, maybe we have to just wrap up our discussion here. It was a really, truly meaningful moment to learn about how we can protect and realize the truth and justice, and what kinds of roles and responsibilities we should take and perform to improve the independence and the freedom of the press, and make the commune goodness called peace. As journalists in the digital era where the world is connected through the media, I've also learned a lot and thought a lot of things through this the meaningful forum as a journalist, but I believe you all are having the same mind with us too. Okay, lastly, from the hour, almost 3 hour, the presentation and the interview and the forum, I found two very important keywords. That is trust and humanity. Trust and humanity. That's what I have in my mind, just wrapping up this international journalist forum. For that, some other words that are added to follow that: dignity and quality and truth for that. Thank you for delivering great thoughts and ideas, and you were uncountable, the great the experience and sharing with us. So thank you so much for the presenters. Okay, from now on, we will have the session to introduce our SIGNIS members who attended the forum. So we will introduce them to you. And the welcome mass will be held at Sogang University, the St. Ignatius Chapel, and then the welcome dinner will be held after that at the Gonzaga Convention. Now, maybe you, the audience, might have some more opinions or questions, but we'll leave that for the next time. I would like to deeply appreciate all your participation, and especially I would like to extend all the presenters and the attendance for today. Thank you very much. And I would like to extend my deepest thanks to all of you, especially joining online too, and with the forum, either in person and online. Thank you.